Story 1. The Whispering Carolers. It was Christmas Eve, and snow blanketed the small village of Winter Hollow. Emma Finley, a schoolteacher in her early 30s, stirred spiced cider in her cozy kitchen while festive music played softly on the radio. The smell of cinnamon and cloves filled the air, blending with the crackling warmth of the fireplace. As she arranged cookies on a plate, a soft sound drifted through the air, carolers singing outside. Their harmonized voices sang Silent Night, slow and haunting, drawing her toward the frosted window. She smiled, expecting to see cheerful faces under warm scarves. But as she peered out, she saw no one, only an empty street bathed in dim, flickering streetlights. The singing continued, louder now, resonating from inside the house. Trembling, Emma followed the sound to the living room. Her old radio crackled, broadcasting the eerie carol, though she had switched it off earlier. Suddenly, icy breath grazed her neck, and a whisper hissed, "Join the chorus, forever." Panic surged through her veins. She backed away, only to feel the floor beneath her feet stiffen with frost. An unnatural chill crept up her legs. The mirror above the fireplace shimmered, and ghostly figures clad in Victorian caroler costumes stared back, hollow-eyed, mouths locked in eternal song. With each haunting note, her body grew colder, her breath forming misty clouds. She lunged for the fireplace poker, smashing the radio in desperation. The song silenced, briefly. A deeper, more malevolent verse began, reverberating through the house. The carolers emerged from the mirror, skeletal hands outstretched. Emma screamed and threw the poker, but it passed through them like mist. Their ghostly forms surrounded her, icy hands gripping her wrists. She struggled, but the room twisted, pulling her into a swirling winter storm that raged beyond the mirror's surface. Frost clawed at her lungs as she was dragged deeper into an endless frozen street lit by ghostly lanterns. The hollow-eyed carolers resumed their mournful song as she realized she had become part of the cursed choir, doomed to sing in the eternal frozen night. Desperate to escape, Emma stumbled through the eerie, snow-covered streets. Ghostly buildings loomed in the distance, their darkened windows like watchful eyes. As she tried to navigate the endless labyrinth, she heard faint sobs echoing through the icy air. "Help, please," the voice whispered. It sounded like a child. Driven by compassion and hope, she followed the sound to an abandoned church at the village's center. Its towering spire pierced the starless sky, and broken stained glass windows emitted an otherworldly glow. Trembling, she pushed open the heavy, frost-covered doors. Inside, the pews were empty, coated in a thick layer of ice. Candles flickered faintly, casting eerie shadows across the ancient stone walls. Sobbing intensified as she neared the altar. There a young boy knelt, his tiny body trembling with cold. "Who are you?" Emma whispered, approaching cautiously. The boy turned, his face pale and tear-streaked. "They took me, the carolers. They take everyone who hears their song. You can't let them finish the final verse." Before Emma could respond, a thunderous crash echoed through the church. The doors slammed shut, trapping them inside. The mournful singing resumed, now thunderous and relentless. Shadows twisted and converged at the back of the church as the ghostly carolers emerged from the walls. "Run," the boy cried, grabbing her hand. Together, they fled down the nave, dodging spectral hands that clawed at them from the darkness. Emma's heart pounded as she spotted a small side door partially ajar. With every ounce of strength, she shoved it open, and they tumbled into the frigid night. But the carolers' song pursued them, echoing from every street and alley. Desperation pushed Emma forward as she realized there was only one place left to go, the village bell tower. If she could ring the ancient bell, maybe it could break the curse. Reaching the tower's base, Emma and the boy scrambled up the frozen staircase as ghostly wails filled the air. Frost-covered steps threatened to send them plunging into the icy depths below. Breathless, they reached the bell platform just as the spectral carolers swarmed through the walls. With trembling hands, Emma seized the thick bell rope and pulled with all her might. The bell groaned but remained still, frozen solid. "It's frozen," she cried. "The song," the boy gasped. "Sing the hymn back. It's the only way." Emma's throat felt raw with cold, but she began singing the same cursed carol, forcing her voice over the howling wind and spectral screams. Her defiant notes clashed against the ghostly melody. The bell trembled, cracks spidering across its icy surface. With a deafening clang, it shattered, releasing a burst of blinding light. The ghostly carolers shrieked as the light consumed them, dissolving into the winter wind. Emma collapsed, gasping for breath. When she opened her eyes, dawn's soft light bathed the village, now restored and silent. The boy was gone, leaving behind only a single silver bell resting in her frost-bitten hand. And in the distance, faint and sorrowful, the last notes of Silent Night echoed one final time. Story 2. The Cursed Christmas Gift. Jack Hollis despised Christmas. He saw it as a hollow, commercialized season filled with forced cheer. This year, he had resolved to spend the holiday alone, wrapped in the bitter comfort of isolation. Late on Christmas Eve, he stepped onto his front porch for a smoke. As he inhaled the icy air, something caught his eye, a beautifully wrapped gift box resting on his doormat. The tag read, "To Jack, from Santa." Scoffing at the childish prank, Jack brought the box inside and dropped it on his kitchen table. He hesitated, curiosity prickling at him despite his cynicism. Eventually, he tore the glossy red paper, revealing an antique snow globe depicting a picturesque Christmas village, its tiny houses dusted with glittering snow. Frowning, he turned the globe in his hands. As the snow settled, he noticed a lone figure standing in the village square, a tiny figure that looked disturbingly like him. That night, strange noises stirred Jack from sleep. Soft bells jingled somewhere in the distance, followed by the crunch of footsteps on snow. Yet when he peered outside, the ground remained bare. Cursing the neighborhood kids, he returned to bed, but the sounds grew louder, more persistent. The faint chime of a music box played a familiar holiday tune, "Deck the Halls." It seemed to come from his living room. Pulse pounding, Jack crept down the hallway, wielding a heavy flashlight, his breath misted in the freezing air. He flipped the living room light switch, but nothing happened. The only illumination came from the glowing snow globe on the mantel. The figure inside the globe had moved. Now it stood in front of a tiny, snow-covered house that bore an uncanny resemblance to his own. Jack's heart pounded as he approached the snow globe. A chilling breeze swept through the room, despite the closed windows. The music box melody slowed, twisting into a distorted dirge. Suddenly, the globe trembled in his hands, and the miniature village flickered as though alive. The tiny Jack figure turned its head slowly toward him, its painted eyes gleaming with malicious intent. "Impossible," Jack whispered, dropping the globe. It didn't shatter. Instead, it bounced once before settling upright, unscathed. Ghostly whispers filled the room. He whirled around and saw frost etching sinister patterns on the windows. The air thickened with icy mist as faint shadows moved just beyond his vision. Desperate, Jack grabbed the snow globe and hurled it against the fireplace. This time, cracks splintered across its glass surface, but instead of shattering, the cracks glowed with an eerie blue light. The house shuddered violently, and Jack stumbled back, colliding with the couch. His living room twisted and stretched as if being consumed by an unseen force. The walls rippled like fabric, transforming into snow-covered pines and frosted rooftops. "No!" Jack screamed, clawing at the rapidly fading doorway. His hands passed through empty air as the world beyond his home vanished. The glowing cracks in the snow globe widened, and Jack felt himself being pulled toward it by an unseen force. Ice snaked up his arms, numbing his fingers as he fought against the relentless pull. Suddenly, the whispers coalesced into a single mocking voice. "Welcome home, Jack. We've been waiting." With one final, desperate cry, Jack was dragged into the snow globe's cold, shimmering prison. The next morning, curious neighbors noticed Jack's house standing silent and dark. They assumed he'd gone away for the holidays. He'd never been much for company anyway. Inside the abandoned living room, the snow globe rested undisturbed on the mantel. Its tiny Christmas village sparkled under an eternal snowfall. At the village's heart stood a frozen figure. A miniature likeness of Jack, his face locked in an expression of eternal terror. And from deep within the snow globe, faint and sorrowful, the distorted chime of "Deck the Halls" played forever. Story 3. The Krampus Parade. The remote mountain town of Frostmoor was a place forgotten by time, where old traditions lived on stubbornly. The most feared and respected of these was the annual Krampus Parade, held every Christmas Eve to ward off the ancient spirit of Krampus, the dark counterpart of St. Nicholas. Never miss the parade, the elders warned. If the bells stop ringing, he will come. This year, however, a brutal snowstorm descended upon Frostmore, burying the narrow streets under 6 feet of snow. For the first time in 2 centuries, the parade was canceled. Families bolted their doors and shuttered their windows, hoping the old stories were just folklore. But as midnight approached, the wind howled with unnatural fury, and deep, resonant bells tolled through the storm, not from sleighs, but from something far more sinister. Thomas Keller, a father of 3, couldn't ignore the terrified wails cutting through the storm. Clutching a lantern and a rusted axe, he braved the night. The snowdrifts were unnaturally high, making each step a struggle. Shadows twisted in the storm, and the sound of dragging chains echoed through the icy streets. Despite the frost biting his face, sweat trickled down his back. When he reached the square, his lantern's light illuminated a grotesque scene. Monstrous hoofprints circled the snow-covered fountain, their edges sizzling with dark magic. Then he saw them. Children from the village, frozen in place like grotesque ice sculptures, their mouths twisted in silent screams. A deep, guttural snarl tore through the wind. Thomas turned slowly, his breath freezing in his throat. Towering over him stood Krampus, a monstrous figure, cloaked in tattered furs, twisted horns piercing the stormy sky. Rusted chains hung from its muscular arms, ending in wicked hooks and bells stained with something dark and ancient. "The pact is broken," it growled. Its voice was the sound of cracking ice and roaring fire. Thomas barely had time to raise his axe before the chains lashed out, wrapping around his torso with crushing force. He gasped as frost spread across his body, numbing his limbs. "Please, spare them," he begged, tears freezing on his cheeks. Krampus leaned in close, its breath reeking of burnt pine and sulfur. "They belong to me now. You failed the tradition." With a deafening crack, Thomas was yanked into the storm, vanishing into the blinding white void. But this was only the beginning. Deep within the blizzard, Thomas awakened in a nightmarish version of Frostmore, darkened, frozen, and twisted beyond recognition. The familiar streets were lined with grotesque effigies of villagers, their faces locked in frozen terror. From the icy shadows, faint cries echoed, children's voices pleading for help. Determined, Thomas forced himself to move, every step sending shards of pain through his frostbitten limbs. He gripped his rusted axe tightly, following the distant voices into a labyrinth of icy alleyways. Spectral flames flickered within frost-rimed windows, illuminating cruel scenes of forgotten punishments. He stumbled into the town square again, but this time it was transformed into a twisted carnival of horrors. An enormous frozen Christmas tree stood at the center, its branches adorned with cracked ornaments that whispered the names of the lost. At the base of the tree stood Krampus's throne, a twisted structure made of bones and ice. Thomas saw his children bound by enchanted chains, struggling against their icy bonds. "You dare return?" Krampus growled, emerging from the shadows. Fueled by desperation, Thomas charged with a furious cry. His axe struck Krampus's chest but shattered on impact, sending icy shards scattering across the frozen ground. "You cannot fight fate," the monster hissed, "but you can trade." Krampus extended a clawed hand, offering a rusted bell engraved with ancient runes. "One life, for theirs. Choose." Tears burned in Thomas's eyes, freezing on his cheeks. Without hesitation, he took the bell and rang it with every ounce of strength he had left. Its echo shattered the stillness, and the chains binding his children disintegrated. As his children fled into the swirling storm, Thomas collapsed at the foot of Krampus's throne, his strength gone. The last thing he saw was the creature's burning eyes and the faint outlines of his children's faces, vanishing into the swirling snow. By dawn, Frostmore lay still and silent, buried beneath a heavy cloak of snow. The townsfolk emerged cautiously, their faces pale and hollow with dread. The town square was eerily pristine, except for the enormous hoofprints, shattered chains, and a lone rusted bell resting at the base of the ancient tree. No one ever spoke of the Krampus parade again, but on every Christmas Eve, when the wind howls like a living beast and the distant sound of bells drifts through the storm, the people of Frostmore lock their doors and pray. And in the swirling snow beyond their homes, Unseen claws carve fresh names into an ancient, blood-stained list.